You think a system fails when something attacks it. That is not how ecosystems collapse. Ecosystems collapse when multiple pressures arrive simultaneously, and the system's response to each one makes the others worse. The raptor ant colony has never been attacked, not once, across 30 million years of Chitophilian history. What is happening right now is not an attack. It is a geometry problem. The colony's territorial boundary sits at the junction of three converging ecosystems. Each one is pressing inward. Each one is producing a response from the colony that is perfectly rational. And collectively, those rational responses are building a trap the colony has no mechanism to detect. You don't need a predator to end a dynasty. You need three pressures and a system that was never designed to read them simultaneously. On Earth, the most dangerous zone in any landscape is not the harshest habitat. It is the edge between habitats. Ecotones, the transition zones between two distinct ecosystems, concentrate selection pressure in a way neither habitat does independently. Research confirms what the biology predicts. Species richness and abundance tend to peak in ecotonal areas. More organisms compete for more variable resources across a narrower band of territory. The edge is where the arms race runs fastest. For a territorial species holding an ecotone boundary, this creates a paradox documented in field ecology. The boundary that gives you access to the most resource diversity is also the boundary that is hardest to defend, most likely to shift, and most sensitive to simultaneous pressure from multiple directions. Now consider the raptor ant colony at 30 million years post-seeding. Its territorial boundary is not at the edge of one ecosystem. It is at the junction of three: the oak forest interior, the acid fern toxic belt, now confirmed as a continuous corridor across central Chitophilia, and the mangrove coast. The colony holds the most resource-rich position on the continent. It also holds the most geometrically unstable position on the continent. And when the first external pressure arrived, the scout losses at the swamp edge 2 episodes ago, the colony's territorial algorithm produced a rational response. Contract from the loss zone, redirect foraging pressure elsewhere. That response has now compounded. What happens when every rational response a system makes to a local problem makes the system's global position worse, and the system has no mechanism to detect the difference between a local problem and a structural one? The edge effect, the documented tendency for biological diversity and abundance to increase at habitat boundaries, has a corollary that receives significantly less attention. Edge habitats are generalist habitats. The conditions that produce high diversity also produce high selective pressure for organisms that can exploit multiple resource types simultaneously. Research on ecotone biology confirms ecotones may also host species not found in either adjacent ecosystem, organisms that evolved specifically to occupy the transition zone itself, tracking the boundary as it moves. On Arthronia, at 29 million years post-seeding, this is Arthronian worldbuilding, built directly from the mechanism above. A descendant of Lutorophytum palastromordax arrives at a configuration the aphid radiation has never produced before. Limaurophytum confinium, the border aphid, body length 50 to 65 centimeters, weight 2.2 to 3.4 kilograms, visually unremarkable, medium build, no armor, no extreme modifications, no vivid coloration. It is the most generic-looking organism to appear in the Chitophilian fossil record since the grass aphid. That is the mechanism. Every aphid lineage in Chitophilia specialized deeper into a single habitat. The chemistry demanded it. The competition enforced it. Limaurophytum moved in the opposite direction. Its stylet is intermediate, capable of piercing soft plant tissue, scraping bark, and processing organic matter from shallow water. None of these as efficiently as the specialist lineages, but all of them adequately. Its exoskeleton carries a moderate hydrophobic coating, not enough for full saltwater immersion, but sufficient for brackish water. Its spiracles can hold a partial seal for 15 minutes, enough to cross flooded ecotone sections. Generalism in a world of specialists is not degraded specialization. It is the only viable strategy for an organism that evolved to live on a boundary that moves. Lemuriphytum does not own a territory. It owns the transition zone itself, tracking the chemical gradient between forest, swamp, and mangrove, shifting colony position as the boundary shifts beneath it. But the anatomical innovation that matters most is its chemoreceptor array, the most sophisticated chemical detection system of any arthropod in Chitophilia. Lemuriphytum can simultaneously track 6 distinct food source chemical signatures, including the pheromone residue trails of other arthropods, including Raptor Ant foraging trails. The colony withdrew from the ecotone boundary across the previous 2 episodes. The trails it left did not disappear. Ant trail pheromone persists in the substrate, and the physical disruption of a major foraging route leaves chemical residue lasting far longer than the active signal. Lemuriphytum colonies moved into the vacated zone and began laying their own overlapping chemical trails, not to claim territory, but to track resource gradients. No intent, no strategy. The result, the ecotone boundary, is now saturated with Lemuriphytum pheromone signature, layered across the fading remnant of the Raptor Ant trail network. When the colony sends new scouts to the boundary zone, their navigation system encounters chemical noise it cannot resolve. Individual ant foraging experience builds territorial memory through successful trail reinforcement, but the trails the returning scouts are reading no longer correspond to the resource landscape that laid them. The colony is navigating its own boundary from a corrupted map. The boundary navigation has failed, and at the same moment, a resource the colony has been passively harvesting without understanding is being stolen from above by something in the canopy the ants have never seen. Ancestral trait re-expression, the reactivation of a genetic toolkit suppressed in a derived lineage, is documented across evolutionary biology. The mechanism, developmental pathways are rarely deleted, they are suppressed. The regulatory genes that activate mouthpart morphogenesis in Hemiptera operate through transcription factor cascades that can be modified by selection pressure without eliminating the underlying genetic architecture. Aphid mouthpart structure is generated through cuticular deposition between molts. The physical form of the stylet is shaped by a developmental program that can, under sufficient selective pressure, be redirected. This is world-building speculation built on the documented mechanism. What I describe next has not happened on Earth. At 29.5 million years post-seeding, a subpopulation of Aerophytum filtranthus faces a new selective pressure. Its lamellate filter organ, the structure that replaced the ancestral stylet, is exposed and delicate during active feeding. Contact predation is killing individuals before alarm pheromone can propagate. The response that survived, a lineage in which the suppressed stylet developmental program partially reactivated, not producing a plant-piercing stylet, but a fine, needle-precision piercing tube, optimized for a target the ancestral program was never designed for. Kleptophytum siphonovorus, the thief aphid, body length 20 to 28 centimeters, slender, fast. Its surface chemical signature has evolved to closely match Aerophytum's own alarm pheromone profile, passive chemical mimicry that makes it undetectable to the colony's monitoring system until direct physical contact. Its stylet targets the siphunculus junction, where the defensive spray organ meets the abdomen wall. Inserted there, it bypasses the defensive secretion entirely, tapping the hemolymph circulatory system directly. The host survives, weakened. Kleptophytum is not a predator. It is a kleptoparasite, stealing processed nutrients from organisms that have already done the metabolic work. One feeding event sustains it for up to 3 days. What this produces for the raptor ant colony is invisible and structural. The passive sugar harvest at the mangrove canopy edge, Aerophytum's honeydew aerosol settling on accessible lower branches, has been degrading for 500,000 years. Kleptophytum weakens individual filter feeders faster than they recover, fragmenting colonies into smaller, more dispersed defensive postures, reducing the filter wall density and the aerosol volume it produces. The sugar-coated leaves the scouts have been finding are thinner, less frequent. The colony's foraging algorithm registers a depleting resource and extends its search radius, a rational response that pulls more workers away from the interior, away from the boundary zone already navigating from a corrupted map. 3 pressures are compounding. Navigation failed, passive harvest degrading. And at the swamp edge, classified as geography 2 episodes ago, something has begun building. Ecosystem engineering, the modification of an environment by an organism as a byproduct of its own survival behavior, creating or destroying habitat for other species, is documented across invertebrate lineages on Earth. Beavers are the reference. Dam construction changes water flow, creates wetland habitat, alters sedimentation across a catchment area extending far beyond the dam site. The beaver does not intend to create a wetland. It intends to build a structure that makes its own ambush position more defensible. The wetland is the system-level consequence of a locally selfish behavior. Caddisfly larvae construct silk-anchored retreats from organic material that alter streambed hydrology and create microhabitat heterogeneity for organisms that never interact with the caddisfly directly. Ecosystem engineering by invertebrates has been documented to have stronger ecological impact than engineering by mammals, because invertebrate engineers operate at scales that permeate an ecosystem rather than dominating it from a single point. On Arthronia, at 30 million years post-seeding, explicitly Arthronian speculation from the documented mechanism, population pressure on Cryptomantis paludioculus has produced a derived lineage under a specific selective pressure. Acid Fern swamp expansion has been destroying Cryptomantis ambush sites faster than individuals can relocate. Individuals that modified their environment survived at higher rates. Paludiops fabricator, the swamp architect. Body length, 70 to 90 centimeters. Weight, 5.0 to 7.5 kilograms. It retains the UV-sensitive 280-degree compound eyes of Cryptomantis and the chemical crypsis surface coating. Its raptorial forelegs have transformed. The apodeme spring operates at lower tension. The explosive strike is slower now, controlled. The foreleg claws have broadened into manipulation limbs. The mandibles sever acid fern rhizome sections up to 8 centimeters in diameter. Along its ventral thorax, a gland complex secreting a viscous, waterproof biological adhesive derived from modified digestive enzymes that hardens on contact with water into a rubbery, water-resistant cement. Paludiops builds. It cuts rhizome sections and binds them into raised platforms at the swamp forest ecotone boundary. elevated 30 to 50 centimeters above the waterline, positioned for visual range over both the swamp interior and the forest edge simultaneously. From these platforms it ambushes prey crossing the ecotone. The platforms are built for hunting. What they do to the ecosystem is something else entirely. Each platform traps sediment, creates a dry microzone, slows water flow, functions as a dam, not by intention, but by physics. The acid fern swamp expands into new territory, partly because Paludiops platforms are redirecting water flow toward previously dry forest edge areas, flooding them, creating the chemical conditions the acid fern requires to establish. The swamp is not just growing, something is building it inward. The raptor ant colony's tunnel network is encountering new obstacles, rhizome debris, water in previously dry passages. The colony digs around it. Each diversion costs workers, costs time, costs foraging capacity at exactly the moment foraging returns are already declining. The colony still has no name for what is building at its boundary. It is registering consequences, not the cause. At 30 million years post-seeding, the acid fern belt is a continuous corridor. 3 zones, 1 junction. The colony's territory has never been smaller. Its food sources have never been more contested. Its navigation has never been less reliable. And deep in the tunnel network, the queen performs her periodic brood assessment. Worker count is down, not catastrophically, not visibly, just fewer than the previous cycle. The colony's chemistry shifts. The primer pheromone in ant biology is documented. A chemical signal, slow-acting, physiological in effect, taking days to weeks to produce measurable change. Queen fire ants produce a primer pheromone that retards reproductive development in their daughters. When the signal composition shifts, the physiology shifts with it. The daughters begin changing. In the chamber below the Chitophilian forest floor, no decision is made. The chemical environment of the colony has crossed a threshold. Fewer foraging returns, fewer nutrient inputs, a resource-to-brood ratio that has dipped below a value encoded into the colony's chemistry across 40 million years of selection pressure. The primer signal changes in composition. Workers begin delivering a different quality of nutrition to a specific cluster of larvae. More protein, more fat, more of the secretions that, over the following weeks, will redirect a developmental pathway that has never been redirected before in this colony's history. A colony does not decide to reproduce, the chemistry decides. The chemistry is the accumulated record of every threshold crossed, every resource contraction, every territorial retreat that any ancestor of this colony survived and transmitted forward. It is not memory, it is selection pressure made chemical. The colony is not panicking, it is not retreating, it is preparing. But preparation and deterioration are not mutually exclusive. A system can begin preparing for a future state while the conditions driving that preparation continue to worsen. The larvae are being fed, the boundary is still corrupted, the harvest is still thinning, the swamp is still building inward, all simultaneously, all without any part of the system being aware of the whole. What is the difference between a system that is adapting to survive and a system that is producing its next generation because the current one is already failing? 30 million years, the raptor ant colony arrived in Chitophilia as an invasive species with no natural predator, no territorial competitor, no resource constraint it could not overcome by expansion. That was 8 million years ago. The continent it arrived in no longer exists in the same configuration. 3 zones now, 3 pressures, one boundary moving inward from all sides simultaneously, not because anything planned it, not because anything decided the raptor ant should contract, but because three separate selection events produce three separate organisms that together create a geometry the colony's algorithm was never designed to read. Selection pressure does not coordinate. It does not plan. It does not know the colony exists. It simply produces outcomes. The outcomes accumulate. The geometry changes. Deep in the tunnel network, one chamber, 6 workers attending a single larva at the center of the cluster, 2 feeding, 2 grooming, 2 stationed at the entrance. Above it, 14 body lengths of packed earth and root fiber. The colony forages its shrinking territory. The border is corrupted. The harvest is thinning. The swamp is building inward. The larva does not know any of this. It is being fed. That is all.